What she tackles is what Van Jones coined white lash. And we're going to check out her first section here called Kindling. All right. Although I first wrote about white rage in a Washington Post op-ed following the killing of Michael Brown and the subsequent uprising in Ferguson, Missouri, the concept started to germinate much earlier. It was in the wake of another death at the hands of police, that of Amadou Diallo, a West African immigrant who, stepping out of his apartment building in New York City, was mowed down in a hail of New York Police Department bullets on February 4th, 1999. Though the killing was horrific enough, 41 bullets were fired, 19 of which hit their target. What left me truly stunned was the clinical and antiseptic policy rationale given by Mayor Giuliani. On the news show's Nightline, the mayor, virtually ignoring Diallo's death, confidently spouted one statistic after the next to demonstrate how the NYPD was the most restrained and best behaved police department you could imagine. He touted policies that had reduced crime in New York and dismissed African Americans' concerns about racial profiling, stop and frisk, and police brutality as unfounded. If the NYPD weren't in those poorer neighborhoods, he asserted, the police would be accused of caring only about the affluent. Giuliani then countered that the real issue was the community's racism against the police and unwillingness to take responsibility for the issues plaguing their neighborhoods. But restrained and behaved police don't fire 41 bullets at an unarmed man. Moreover, New York's aggressive law enforcement policy appeared to expend most of its energy on the groups bringing the smallest yield of criminal activity. In 1999, blacks and Hispanics made up 50% of New York City's population, but accounted for 84% of those who were being stopped and frisked by the NYPD, while the majority of illegal drugs and weapons were actually found on the relatively small number of whites detained by the police. There obviously was so much more going on here than Amadou Diallo's death than was actually being discussed throughout the media. More than Giuliani was letting on, and more than even outraged discussions in beauty shops and barbershops managed to pinpoint. 15 years later, I experienced that same feeling, although the circumstances this time were somewhat different. In August 2014, Ferguson, Missouri went up in flames, and commentators throughout the print and digital media served up variations of the same story. African Americans, angered by police killing of an unarmed black teen, were taking out their frustration in unproductive and predictable ways, rampaging, burning, and looting. Now, please let it be noted that most of the burning and the looting that happened in Ferguson, Missouri, because I know plenty of people that live in the area, most of the rampaging, burning, and the looting were happening by paid protesters. That means people who came into the area that did not have a vested interest in the area were doing the looting and the burning. This often happens to black neighborhoods. You have people from the outside that come in, that burn, that loot, that steal, and then those who are actual residents there get the blame for the damage that was done. So let's keep reading. Framing the discussion, dominating it, in fact, was an overwhelming focus on black rage. Op-eds and news commentators debated whether Michael Brown was surrendering to or assaulting a police officer when 6 bullets took him down. They wrangled over whether Brown was really an innocent 18-year-old college student, which he was, or a thug who had just committed a strong arm robbery. Again, the footage that was shown and utilized to say that Michael Brown had just come from the store committing a robbery of some kind, the footage was many months old. Again, this is something that you don't widely hear reported. But if you look at him in the footage at the store, and then you look at him in the footage of him laying in the streets, clearly it was not the same time frame. But again, this doesn't matter to someone who already sees Michael Brown as a suspect and a threat. The operative question seemed to be whether African Americans were justified in their rage, even if that rage manifested itself in the most destructive, nonsensical ways. Again and again, across America's ideological spectrum, from Fox News to MSNBC, the issue was framed in terms of black rage, which it seemed to me entirely missed the point. I had previously lived in Missouri and had seen the subtle but powerful ways that public policy had systematically uncut democracy in the state. When, for example, the Brown versus Board of Education decision came down, the state immediately declared that all its schools would be integrated, only to then announce that it would leave it up to the local districts to implement the Supreme Court decision. Well, we know how that went. The movement was glacial. It took a whole nother generation of black parents fighting all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court in search of some relief. In the final analysis, however, Missouri schools remained separate and unequal. Thus, in the 21st century, Michael Brown School District had been on probation for 15 years, annually accruing only 10 out of 140 points on the state's accreditation scale. So you're talking about decades and decades piled up of injustice and inequality in the education system. So for him to have even graduated and had been getting ready to start college after that weekend was probably a miracle. But as we know, he didn't get a chance to start his college education. It was the same with policing, housing, voting, unemployment, all of which carried the undercurrents of racial inequality. Even after the end of slavery, the triumphs of the civil rights movement, and the election of Barack Obama to presidency, the policies in Missouri were articulated as coolly as were Giuliani's in New York. That led me to an epiphany. What was really at work here was white rage, not black rage. With so much attention focused on the flames, everyone had ignored the logs and the kindling. In some ways, it is easy to see why. White rage, and this is very important, because I see this quite a bit. White rage is not about visible violence, right? I get lots of my Caucasian brothers and sisters saying, well, we're not in the streets protesting, or we're not in the streets doing X, Y, and Z, or when we don't like a decision, we don't go out and do X, Y, and Z, right? But here's the reality. You don't have to. Listen to what she says. White rage is not about visible violence, but rather it works its way through the courts, the legislatures, and a range of government bureaucracies. See, when white people get upset or angry at black people, they don't take to the streets. They take to paper and pen, and they start creating legislation that restricts your freedoms. I know plenty of people can attest to what I just said. All you have to do is look at the policies that have been created in states within the last 8 years. Okay? It wreaks havoc subtly, almost imperceptibly. Too imperceptibly, certainly, for a nation consistently drawn to the spectacular. In other words, to what it can see. It's not the Klan. White rage doesn't have to wear sheets, burn crosses, or take to the streets. Working the halls of power, it can achieve its ends far more effectively and far more destructively. Hence, the new administration and the cabinet that is being put together, to me, is a result of, right, or an affirmation of white rage. What did our president say all throughout his campaign? White people are upset, white people are angry, and white people don't feel like they're being heard. So what does he do? He doesn't tell them to go out into the streets and protest. He says, if you get me elected, I am going to formulate an administration that can work in the halls of power and achieve its ends far more effectively and far more destructively. I'm going to put together a cabinet of people who are going to exact your white rage through legislation and policy. You don't have to lift a finger, white America, because we are going to lift it for you. So I know people don't want to hear that. I know people think that they're not going to be complicit in some of the policies that are going to be enacted in this country as a result of white rage. But the fact is, you're going to be complicit. All right. So let's keep reading. In my Washington Post op-ed, therefore, I set out to make white rage visible, to blow graphite onto that hidden fingerprint and trace its historic movements over the past 150 years. The trigger of white rage inevitably is black advancement. People say it is not. They say, I don't understand why these black people just can't get it together. I don't understand why their neighborhoods are the way they are. I don't understand why they won't work. I don't understand why they're on government assistance. Not realizing that some of the programs that have been designed in this country have been designed to make black people, for the most part, a permanent underclass. And that when black people do advance, in spite of all of the things put in place to suppress black wealth and black mobility in this country, it causes what she says, or it triggers white rage. I'm going to say it again. The trigger for white rage is black advancement. And if you look throughout history, you know this to be true. All we have to do is just give you Wilmington. There was Wilmington race riots. Oklahoma, Black Wall Street race riots. What were those people doing? Were they being lazy? No. They had businesses. They had banks. They had grocery stores. You know, they were one of the wealthiest places in our country. But what happened? It triggered white rage. People were infuriated that these black people had advanced and that they were self-sufficient within their own community, and they destroyed it and they burned it down. And the United States government was complicit in that as well, because they were dropping weapons on the people and burning the place down. So again, the trigger for white rage is black advancement. It is not the mere presence of black people that is the problem. Because if you're just present, you know, I can continue to give false narratives about you. I can continue to talk about you. I can continue to talk about your ancestors. It's not just the presence of black people that's the problem. Rather, it is blackness with ambition, with drive, with purpose, with aspirations, and with demands for full and equal citizenship. That is what triggers white rage. It's not just black people existing. It's black people existing and wanting to have ambition, drive, purpose, aspirations, and actually demand to be treated as a full citizen in this country. That is what triggers white rage. All right? It is blackness that refuses to accept subjugation. It is blackness that refuses to give up. A formidable array of policy assaults and legal contortions has consistently punished black resilience, black resolve, and I added black excellence. These things are actually punished for the most part in American society, especially if you aren't of what they call the talented 10th, or you don't have some kind of connection to a Greek organization. Most of the time, your resilience or your resolve to do excellently as a black person is challenged, and it is put through the ringer, right? If you want to get anything done. All the while, white rage manages to maintain not only the upper hand, but also apparently the moral high ground. Is Giuliani chastising black people to fix the problems of their own neighborhood instead of always scapegoating the police, as he says? It's the endless narratives about a culture of black poverty that devalues education, hard work, family, and ambition. It's a mantra told so often that even some African Americans themselves have come to believe it. Few even think anymore to question these stories or studies of black fathers abandoning their children, of rampant drug use in the black neighborhood, of African American children hating education because school is acting white. All of these theories have been disproved. They have actually been disproved. Yet remain foundational in American myth. To this day, I still hear people saying that the problem with black people is that there's no fathers in the home, when studies actually show that black men are actually present and active fathers in their children's lives. So somebody's lying. All right? And the fact that every decade there was something happening with black fathers. And in the 50s and 60s, black families were intact, more intact than white families were. So you can't just say all of this stuff is happening because it's an absence of a father. Malcolm X was there for his children, assassinated. Martin Luther King was there for his children and raising them, assassinated. So you have to ask yourself the question, who's really absenting the black community of black men? Who's really taking out the black men in the community? And why do they think that you don't have common sense to kind of put two and two together? The truth is that enslaved Africans plotted and worked hard, with some even fighting in the Union Army for their freedom and their citizenship. After the Civil War, they took what little they had and built schools, worked the land to establish their economic independence, and searched desperately to bring their families, separated by slavery, back together. That drive, that initiative, that resolve was met with black codes. And if you don't know what black codes are, please go and research the term black codes. All right? With army troops throwing them off of their promised 40 acres, and then a series of Supreme Court decisions eviscerating any actual application, right, of the 13th, the 14th, or the 15th Amendments. So you keep saying that black people are lazy, that black people don't have a work ethic, that black people just won't get up and help themselves. But the reality of what has happened in this country historically is every time they have gotten up to help themselves, they have been met with opposition. And you would be very, very, very dishonest if you did not admit that, or if you did not see that in history. So we have to stop lying and saying that black people just don't want to do well. And unfortunately, I hear this in the faith community just as much as I hear it outside of the faith community. You have to be realistic and say what things were put in place to oppose black advancement in this country, and what things are still being put in place, and with this coming in administration going to be further put into place to stop